Good morning, reinventors. So quite a crowd here this morning. Thank you all for making the trip out here. And for those of you who've just flown in this morning, thanks for hustling up and getting on out here. Appreciate it. Welcome to our panel on what is the ROI of generative AI? Can the numbers tell the story? This session is part of our track for digital native businesses, or D&Bs. But of course, any business that intends to or is already building with Gen AI and wants to do so with observable ROI should be able to get a lot out of this session. D&Bs have been the pioneers of new technology in the cloud since the first S3 bucket got its first object way back when. And as you can imagine, D&Bs have been at the forefront and been the big movers for building Gen AI technology into their products, services, and infrastructure. My name is Tony Cicada. I'm at AWS, and I lead several programs that help customers prepare for IPO, initial public offerings, next rounds of funding, as well as M&A strategy. For this session, though, what we're going to do is focus on what's really happening with companies who work on building with Gen AI technologies and are held accountable to deliver ROI and how they do it. I'm especially pleased to be joined by our great panelists who we've selected and organized. They're going to be introducing themselves in just a moment, but these are top executives from OfferUp, from AlphaSense, Cloud Zero, and AI21 Labs. So last year at this time, there was a little in the way of clarity for the question of ROI when it came to generative AI. And lots of proof of concepts, POCs, but any successful Gen AI investments, they were kind of drowned out by the confusion around how you were measuring ROI. About 3 months ago, Amazon reported some metrics using Amazon Q, and they provided some hard data points relative to our internal ROI for use of generative AI. You can see them up here. And also over the past year, lots of data has come out from thought leaders, researchers, consulting organizations, showing solid evidence of ROI. So lots of progress has been made, and formalized ways of approaching ROI with data-driven methods are accelerating. So even with all that, a lot of other studies have shown that most people are not clear on the formula exactly. ROI is still not considered straightforward, and a lot of companies are not putting in place or don't yet have in place tools for measuring ROI, even for many very large companies. So achieving and measuring ROI in generative AI is still elusive for the vast majority of organizations out there, and that's why we're fortunate to have today with us executives from these companies that I mentioned. And they're at the forefront of the technology, and somehow we're able to organize them. They're actually very different companies, and they approach things from a very different set of perspectives. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. We can dive a little bit deeper. Alex, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Alex Naginski, Vice President of Engineering from OfferUp. I'm in charge of the engineering, tech, QA, and PMO organizations. And a little bit about my background. I've been in the tech industry for over 2 decades, launched numerous products with millions of users, and very excited to be here to actually talk about ROI of AI.
Hi, my name is Pankaj Dugar. I'm the Senior Vice President and General Manager for North America for AI21 Labs. AI21 is a research lab that's focused on bringing the technology to enterprises. And my job is to look at all of our partnerships and all of our go-to-market strategy globally.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Ackerson, VP of Product at AlphaSense. I lead our AI product development. AlphaSense is an AI-powered search engine for market intelligence. So we aggregate lots of premium business documents like company filings and earnings calls, sell-side research, an expert network, and then we leverage AI to help search across all that content. And we're used by lots of companies across both financial services and also corporates.
Excellent. Eric Peterson, I'm the CTO and founder of Cloud Zero. Cloud Zero is in the business of engineering profit. you might have noticed some of us are dressed slightly differently up here. I don't know what exactly happened there, but it's kind of important to stand out, I guess, at some point. Although I can connect you with my shoe tailor if you want. So what does that mean, engineer profit? For Cloudera, we see a lot of organizations. We help them manage and understand the ROI of their cloud spend and what they're building. And we do that by connecting the technology decisions they're making, the investment in AWS technology, AI technology as well these days, increasingly so, and connect that back to the objectives of the business. How often do we sit there and look at our cloud spend and wonder, how is this contributing to building a profitable business? So that's how Cloudera gets at solving that equation. And these days, we spend a lot of time thinking about the ROI of AI initiatives because it is driving a lot of spend, that's for sure.
Yes, it is. Matter of fact, with the programs that I lead over at AWS, we see a very tight focus on the part of investors in terms of what is going on in companies that are implementing generative AI and how they're actually measuring that going along. So with that, thank you, and let's go ahead and jump to the first question. And I will also mention that we're going to have we're going to be carving out some time during the last 15 minutes for any questions from the audience. So we'll go ahead and take the questions at that time. First question, you can see it up here. How do you balance the initial investment of generative AI against long-term gains? What strategies have proven effective? Alex, would you like to jump in on that one first?
Sure. The kind of simple answer is to start small, right? Don't overinvest. If you're really looking into product use cases for generative AI, you really want to start with an MVP approach. But I would also say, think about kind of the long-term implications. Don't just bolt on generative AI on top of your products or features that you have right now. Reimagine it and think about kind of what that means long-term. And then work backwards. Break it up into pieces. And then try to kind of implement. The key part of it is why you want to take little slivers, iterative slivers of moving it forward, is it's new to everyone. It's new to employees in your company. It's new to executives. You want to make sure that you're educating people as you take it along. You want to make sure that you're learning best practices. You want to make sure you're getting the right expertise in the building. And then for internal purposes of productivity, like tooling, kind of similar approach. Start with a team or a function, limit it, learn, develop your KPIs for success, and that really helps with kind of the momentum long term.
I think those are all great points. So my company tends to work a lot more with customers. So we see a variety of customers and a range of sort of motions when they try to incorporate Gen AI as part of their business business process. So there are a set of like anchor things that you can look at, including things like risk exposure from implementing generative AI, data readiness, which is usually lurking under the surface, and most folks don't realize it until after a potentially successful POC, and they're like, okay, let's go all into this. It is vitally important to try and not try and shoot for the moon right from the very beginning. And there are a set of use cases that the time to production can actually be very, very quick. Those tend not to be sort of the sexiest demos and POC worthy that you can show to the CEO. But the idea is, what are you going to look for when you are trying to get a proper return on investment? It is important to get early wins, not try and hit a home run right from the very beginning. And this is something we regularly tell all of our customers who want plenty of multi-step, multi-tool, complex workflows that all need to be embedded with generative AI. And we always ask them to slow down. Do they even have the people and the internal technical capabilities to actually see these projects through? We'll probably have the chance to talk a lot more through this panel about a variety of other things, but for now, I'm going to pass it to Chris.
Yeah, thanks. We talk to our clients about this question every day. I think they're all struggling with this build versus buy question, which is another angle to this. And maybe to add on to what my panelists were saying, the piece we always emphasize is focus on either areas that are sort of core to your business differentiation, and that's where you want to invest, or maybe workflows, use cases that are bespoke and truly unique to your business. But trust that there are vendors in the market that are building solutions quickly, and those are going to come and plug the gaps. So don't forget to sort of keep an eye on what's happening outside the business as well, and make sure that you're not investing in areas that are better served by partnering or outsourcing those efforts as well.
I get to borrow ideas from everyone because I get to go last here. It's fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff here. I think getting some early wins, starting in a place where you can really think about what you're trying to achieve, is absolute necessities. I work with a lot of customers who are making these investments today. I think there's a lot of different ways we think about it. One question I keep coming back and asking folks is, unless you're in kind of rare air, like AI 21, for example, most of us are not. Gen AI isn't the actual destination. The destination is some sort of customer value, right? Something that we want to build, create, maybe a service or something that we already have that we want to make more efficient. And a lot of times people will come and say, hey, I want to just get into this Gen AI craze. And you got to step back and go, well, what is the value that you're actually trying to deliver in the first place? And then set some goals around that and think about that from that perspective. What's the business outcome that you're looking for? And then you can start to understand, well, when someone comes and asks you, well, why does it cost this? What am I getting in return for this? You've already kind of teed the conversation up with your business to understand this ROI conversation, right? But at the same time, I have people calling me up going, I've just been told by my CEO, we have to have this new AI thing. Tell me what I'm going to do about it. And I'm like, well, what are you trying to do in the first place? So that's where I tend to encourage people to think about first before they go racing down that road. But you will have an amazing ride once you start driving down that street.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We're going to jump into the next question. How does the choice between building custom models versus using pre-trained models affect ROI? Who wants to go here?
So we see this a lot as builders of frontier models ourselves. Many of our customers will ask us to customize the model. And so if you take a step back, this tech is 2 years old. Okay, less than 2 years old, actually. By the time it came to the enterprise, it was, probably, early, mid-23. A lot of people tend to have strong opinions that are also very strongly held, which is to say a lot of our customers and prospects tend to think that for generative AI to be valuable to them, they must necessarily customize it. I think it's important to have opinions, but we would be better served by holding those opinions, even strong ones, a little bit more weakly, just as in weakly. As in, given the advancements in technologies that are happening, things that might have needed customized models, no longer need to be, given the advancements in model quality and things like long context, windows, retrieval augmented generation, et cetera. And this is not to say that customization isn't going to help you, but once you start looking at the total cost of ownership of these customized models, because it's not a once and done thing, this is something that needs to be maintained, over time. You start to see that, hey, maybe I'm better off using prompt engineering, for example, as an example, and not jump right to trying to customize the models, which has a lot of prep work that's honestly required. So we need a lot more longitudinal data. But the advent of smaller language models, the advent of other types of models and other technologies do make it a lot easier to start using pre-trained models along with a combination of other tools and technologies that sort of render the need to make models customized, somewhat unnecessary for many use cases. Again, this is not to say that that's not something large companies with, billions, hundreds of billions of tokens of data, proprietary data, need, but it's something that we've seen, over the last, at least 18 months that I've been at my job. Increasingly people are saying, hey, this is a lot harder than we thought, customizing a model and particularly maintaining it. So we're better off actually using pre-trained models, leaving folks like the AI21 labs to go and build better models for us to be able to use.
Maybe I'll jump in there. I agree with the points here, and just to give the perspective of a company that is building, on top of these models. We've been around for more than a decade and building on open source AI and training models for different use cases for a long time. The idea of pre-trained language models is, older than the sort of generative AI craze. We've been using, building on top of models like BERT since 2019, and then fine-tuning for specific use cases like sentiment analysis and things like that. And we went through this really interesting experience over the last couple of years where in 2023, what we found is the foundation models out of the box weren't good enough for some of the use cases we were trying to build. For example, like trying to summarize an earnings call, you need like really high accuracy. And so we did a lot of fine-tuning of models to get to the level of accuracy we needed. And then what we found is a few months later, the models were good enough for that use case. And so you do need to keep in mind that the models are getting better and better. And so from my perspective, where I would land on this question is almost always you should start building on the pre-trained model out of the box. And there's all kinds of ways to customize that model for your use case without having to fine-tune and sort of serve that model yourself. And then once you're at scale, that's when you would look at the opportunity to optimize. And so there absolutely can be cost latency advantages to fine-tuning a smaller model and serving that once you're at scale. But almost always it makes sense to start and prove and get to production on one of these large pre-trained models.
Yeah. This is heavy lifting to get into the business of training your own model. A lot of times we say, oh, well, one of the reasons we use the cloud is so that we can get away from the undifferentiated heavy lifting, although right now I'd say a lot of what is getting built out across the companies that are building their own or training their own models is it's very differentiated heavy lifting, but the key word here is really heavy lifting. Most of us are not ready for that kind of commitment, and the technology is moving so fast. At the same time, there is a lot of customization, but you have to think of it differently. Things like RAG, things like building your own agents, prompt engineering, actually allows you to customize pre-trained models really, really well. And universally, I would agree. You're absolutely better served in doing that until you get to that place where you have this very specialized use case. But we were in the same boat. At CloudZero, we were using the old school world of AI, back when we all just referred to it as ML, and training a lot of things. And then immediately when we started seeing the new world emerge, we're like, oh, well, I guess we're going to have to go start training some of these new models on that. No, that was not a good idea. And not only that, the technology is moving just so fast. What doesn't work today, you're going to find in a couple of months it works tomorrow. But you do want to think about how you're going to bring your own information into that conversation and how you're going to use these tools. And that is rapidly expanding. So using things like Bedrock and other technology at AWS has been really helpful to tie all of our, what we would call our intellectual property into the pre-trained models that exist already.
I'll just add that basically the summary is faster time to market, use pre-trained models, right? If you have something proprietary, something unique, custom models are the way to go. There's nothing wrong with doing both. And there's a lot of organizations like us, we have lots of custom models, but now that you can use pre-trained models that are very dependable, accurate, you have options to move to those as well. You don't have to replace it overnight.
Okay, perfect. Let's move. How do you organize ROI-focused stakeholders with AI governance and brand protection to ensure alignment and a strong ROI? So, next.
Oh, yeah. You want me to?
No, we're going to go with Chris. Chris, you got anything?
Sure. So for us, we spend a lot of time working directly with our customers to prove out ROI. And so, I love the 4,500 developer years, metric that Amazon uses, and we do something similar, which is trying to measure the efficiency with which our users do their research. They're doing research every day to support really important decisions that the businesses are making. And we can help measure that, that specific time savings. So we can try to quantify that. We also spend a lot of time speaking with the users of the product and trying to grab anecdotes and quotes that support that ROI. It is difficult, particularly when you're using generative AI to augment human productivity to get to that quantitative metric. For us, the biggest ROI would be, we sold a new deal or we avoided a bad investment decision. Those things are hard to measure quantitatively, but if you can capture those anecdotes, you can really sort of drive consensus. And so, that's what we do to sort of prove the ROI of the product. And I always, think if you're doing an internal generative AI product, you'll also have to spend this sort of time thinking about it and proving the value to sort of get that consensus and investment over time as well. And that's, I think, a key piece that people underestimate is, everyone talks about, it's easy to build a demo, it's hard to build a product. Well, it's even harder to build a product that sustains over time. You have to invest and maintain that product. Getting something to production is not the end state. And so, really spending time collecting that data to support is critical.
Good.
Yeah, so I'll just pick up on the last point you mentioned, and then I'll say a couple other things. So I like to sometimes use the phrase, flashy in POC, crappy in production. Because when you're trying to do a POC, it is, in fact, a clean environment, like when you're building chips. But when these solutions face the rough and tumble of the real world, they go from sort of 5, handpicked users during the POC phase to 5,000 people, all sorts of problems come up. And so when you want to try and organize stakeholders, within a company, you have to believe that they have conviction, okay, for the long term. And this is super important because depending on, if you have a strong legal department, strong finance department, product department, et cetera, they all will pull on different vectors. And so you have to, one of the things that I do is I tell my customers, look, can you start with external-facing use cases versus internal-facing use cases? Okay, and let's say you put aside the external-facing use cases. Within the internal-facing use cases, is it across the entire company or is it restricted to one department? And you can pick a legal department, finance department, marketing department, et cetera, because the risk is somewhat contained. And the people that are going to use it, even at scale in production, are a subset of the employees, within a company. So it becomes a little bit easier to start getting that to production and make sure that it becomes a win. And, again, this is not about the flash. Everyone wants their CEO to be able to see like a slick demo. And when you do end up picking a use case that might be around Q&A or summarization, it looks super bland compared to something flashy that was actually shown that had like lots of steps and amazing UI, et cetera, et cetera. So And then the other thing is to over-communicate along the process, because this is something that everyone from the CEO down needs to understand is something that's actually going to take time and concerted effort. But it is very important that you start on that journey. And that's what you do. And, many customers I talk to, not even like the biggest ones, they have 400, 500 use cases, and they've got a dozen projects going on. They all had discretionary budget last year, 23 and a lot of 24, millions of dollars. Anything that had Gen AI attached to it actually got funding. But very, very few of them have shown any sort of ROI because data wasn't ready, they didn't have the internal technical expertise, they went down the wrong path, like fine-tuning or continuous pre-training of models, like XYZ, so many things happened, and those projects are actually floundering. So it's important to build conviction, CEO on down, pick use cases that offer you a quick win and help you build confidence in your ability to take on the next use case and the next use case.
So what I would say is, I think there's three things for me when I think about it. First is transparency, unit economics, and clear business outcomes. And the reason I say those three things is because, one, Gen AI is opening up technology to people who might not necessarily have been interested, to all kinds of stakeholders. Stakeholders are everywhere now. And you're not even certain sometimes who they might be. So you need to be very transparent in terms of what you're building, setting expectations, making sure that people understand where you're coming from and what to get out of this. It's very easy for people to get off to off on a start thinking, this is going to be amazing, it's going to solve all kinds of problems that you're not even conscious that they're thinking is going to solve these problems. So you have to be very transparent and set the right expectations. The unit economics piece comes from setting the stage right for that ROI conversation later when someone comes and asks, well, all right, so then what is the benefit back to us, the business? Why did we make these investments in the first place? And a lot of times we don't think about what does it cost to do the thing that we do, right? If I'm in the business to deliver a widget or a transaction or process information or deliver a recommendation, whatever it is that I'm in the business of doing, the demand drivers of my business, I need to also understand the costs associated to do those things. And you should get right out of the gate thinking about that so that you're at least tracking it, because the conversation will come to you eventually. Those stakeholders will come to you and say, all right, well, wait, what does it cost to do this thing? And then you need to be ready to talk about what's the business objective in the first place. What's the value? Why did we set forward to actually create this thing? And if you've nailed all three of those things, your stakeholders are going to be happy, their expectations are going to be set right. You're going to be very clear on terms of how much it costs to do this, which means you're going to really understand your margins and you're going to understand if it's profitable or not. And then you can clearly articulate both to your internal stakeholders but also the market, what is the business value of this in the first place, right? You nail those three things, you're going to be in a really good spot.
And just to add on to that, part of this is don't make assumptions that stakeholders really understand the technology. Part of this is also education for them. Start from the beginning, have them involved in decisions, have them understand the value, the risk, the opportunity costs of going forward with a certain idea. And then also, one advice is start a committee that's cross-functional, have legal involved, marketing, sales, product, engineering, get all the concerns and perspectives on the table that, from your own perspective, you might not have. And that leads to good conversations. That leads to all the AI governance and brand protection aspects that you should do for your business.
Okay, perfect. And we're almost at the halftime mark. I just wanted to see, get a quick show of hands of folks that may have questions when we do a break for the Q&A. Okay, so there I got.
I sense there's a couple out there, but.
Okay, all right, yep. I see three people over there. And then I see nobody in this section. I saw two people in this section and two people in that section. Okay, great. I think we have a good idea. Another person over here. Okay, perfect. Well, we'll go ahead and hop on to the next question. And then we can take a look at the audience questions. And if we can keep our answers to maybe about a minute, then we can run through a lot of the audience questions.
Great.
So here we go. When you set your strategy and goals, how do you determine the specific metrics to help achieve ROI? Would you like to go first?
Sure. All right. So it depends where you're applying generative AI. Is it for internal purposes or is it for product purposes? A lot of people want to kind of invent new goals and new metrics. The reality is, you know your business, you know what metrics you're trying to move. This is just a tool to support those metrics. In some novel cases, there might be something new, but the reality is most businesses are going to try to apply it to their existing customers. So use your existing goals. There might be some metrics that are unique and some use cases that get created that are unique, but they are not the big movers like the goals you already have in your business. And then on the internal aspects, so if it's a function like engineering, as an example, you know cycle time of user stories is important. You know velocity of teams is important. You know defect rate. All of those are kind of standard goals and metrics that you can kind of optimize with generative AI through tools that you purchase. So there's nothing, from my perspective, new that you need to invent. Yeah, I'll pause there.
So how many folks here are sort of D&Bs, digital native businesses? Or is this mostly other enterprises? Okay, I see
a handful.
I see a few hands here. So this is my sort of favorite sector to actually work with. Not only because there is inherently, by definition, a lot of talent there and a lot of curiosity and the willingness to actually take risks with new capabilities that are regularly coming out in the space, but also because of one other important thing. If you look at the vast majority of enterprises today, a lot of them are focused on, hey, is this going to cut my costs or increase productivity, right? So this is more about the bottom line. But when you look at a lot of the digital native businesses, they are, particularly like enterprise or consumer software companies, they are looking at increasing their top line, with this. That is something, that is incredibly important, but hasn't necessarily become, sort of mainstream. So when you are looking at, what sort of metrics you want to associate with any Gen AI project, it is not only important to actually save developer hours or, get a marketing copy turned around faster, but also see, hey, is there something that I can include as part of my product and charge customers extra for, because their productivity is actually improving, significantly now. So there is still, this is a very new technology, so a lot more longitudinal data is actually required to understand where specifically to quantify the ROI. But we're starting to see this happen, certainly on the bottom line, but we're starting to see enterprise software companies, many of whom, like we work with many of them, are starting to look at increasing their subscription fees, et cetera, based on their ability to provide Gen AI capabilities to their enterprise customers.
Eric?
Oh, well, I think there's a couple different ways to think about it. It's definitely a question about value, right? What is the value that you're delivering? And when you deliver more value, you should think about what that means to you as a business. If I'm delivering more value, hopefully I'm extracting more value from the market in return for doing that, making people's lives easier, making the goal, whatever reason my product exists, easier and more accessible to more folks. But there's a really simple metric that CloudZero's been kind of championing for a couple of years now. We call it the cloud efficiency rate. And we adapted this to really the AI world, which is just simply your AI cloud spend minus revenue over revenue, which is just a simple ratio of AI spend or cloud spend to revenue. And the important thing here is to understand where you are in your journey and how you benchmark against that. You know, a later stage, fully deployed, you know, in production system, you're going to want to shoot for like a 0.95 or like 95% ratio there. But early in that stage, your efficiency rate might be 0. It might be negative. You might be just moving fast. You have objectives to go. But at least be tracking this very simple metric, because it'll help you understand how efficient you are in actually achieving your objectives. And sometimes it might feel like we have limitless budgets or the business is driving us to invest in this technology without really thinking about it. But you still want to understand, am I being more efficient? Am I delivering, you know, efficiently the value that I'm building, and over time, is that improving? And if you get to the right spot, then you're going to come out of that process realizing I also have great margins, and I'm also building a profitable company along the way as well. So I direct people to that just simple metric. We call it the cloud efficiency rate. And we've benchmarked a lot of companies. We have this data available on our website where you can go and actually see how you compare based on your project and where you are in your development. And I think that's super valuable as you start some of these projects.
Perfect. So we have about 24 minutes left. If we're frugal with our answers, then we could probably take at least half a dozen questions.
Enables that trust from users, because I mean the reality is there is business risk from, you know, people sort of accepting the output of AI without a critical lens on it. So I think from the beginning of the project, those are important considerations.
Yeah, you know, I would say there's a lot of frameworks that already exist in the security and privacy spaces anyways. Like Gen AI doesn't give you a free pass to eliminate any of those things, right? You still have to say, well, where's the data going to live, and who's going to have access to it, and how are we going to use it, and what parts are going to be, you know, controlled.
Okay, thank you. We're going to be off stage over here for other questions. We're coming to the end now. Just wanted to mention that we have some other ROI-focused sessions over here at AWS at the reInvent, and if you're still in time to pick them up or watch them on YouTube, then here's a few selections for you. Additionally, here's a few links, including some that might give you some harder numbers relative to ROI on Gen AI. And please, if you would, go into your apps and provide or access the survey within the mobile app when you have a moment. I think we're at the end of time. Yeah. So thank you, everyone, for attending and staying with us all to the end. Appreciate it very much.